What's up, friends? Today we bring you a super interesting video about that diabolical ball of fur that many of you will have right now on top of your sofa. That being that behaves as if it were the king, not only of your house, which is taken for granted, but of your entire neighborhood. Of course, we are talking about cats. We have been researching the different breeds that exist, and today we are going to resolve some very curious doubts. For example, is it common for a cat to be of a breed? And how many exist? How is a new breed created from scratch? And what differences are there with those of dogs? So come on, let's get started because there is a lot to explain. But before getting fully into the topic, it is important to understand how their domestication occurred. Today, it is not time to talk about dates or maps, but about how the process is believed to have happened. That said, if you want to know about the latest scientific developments about their origin, we recently uploaded to the channel a video that it's not because we made it ourselves, but the truth is that it is quite cool. The case of the cat is quite special, and if not, think a little about the rest of domestic animals. Humans decided to domesticate their ancestors because they had something interesting to offer, such as milk, meat, or directly labor force. In addition, almost all these species shared an advantage. They lived in groups with well-defined social hierarchies. So, well, for us, the easy thing was to control or replace the leaders of the group so that all the others would follow behind. And since they were already used to living with each other, moving to live in a closed enclosure with humans was only a matter of quite some time and a bit of patience. Okay, and what about cats? Well, now we know that the ancestor of all cats was the African wildcat, and there lies the crux of the matter. We are talking about a solitary animal that hunted on its own and defended its territory tooth and nail. Basically, group living was not really their thing. Unlike the others, it is believed that the cat went through a process that we could call a kind of self-domestication, although sometimes this term is somewhat debated. That is, it was their own ancestors who began to approach humans. And how could it have happened? Well, simple. According to this hypothesis, human settlements were a magnet for small rodents that went straight for the stored grain. So the ancestors of cats saw there a free buffet and little by little began to approach. In the end, it was a mutually beneficial relationship. Humans tolerated their presence because in return, these felines offered a valuable pest control service and protected their food reserves. Those more daring individuals, those that best tolerated human presence, had a clear advantage, access to easy and safe food. And as these cats prospered more, that greater tolerance was passed on from parents to offspring. Over time, helped a bit by human selection, they learned to coexist both with us and with others of their species. Of course, they continued to retain their independent nature and their hunting skills. And this explains why the modern domestic cat is capable of fending for itself with relative ease. Hence, it is so common to find populations of abandoned or feral cats living in urban areas since they can quickly adapt to the lifestyle of wild felines. In fact, the vast majority of cats in the world do not belong to any specific breed. They are simply common cats. In the case of dogs, almost any mixed breed dog has ancestors that, to a greater or lesser extent, belong to lineages with well-defined characteristics. In cats, the story is the opposite. It is not that a Siamese crossed with a Persian, and from there came the cat on your street. It is that the ancestors of that cat were never of any breed. They are the base model of nature. And if the cat in your neighborhood has a color or a trait that reminds you of a specific breed, it is probably always genetic chance. But how many breeds really exist? Well, it depends on whom you ask. There are different organizations, and each one has its criteria. For example, the CFA or the FIFA are stricter and recognize fewer than 50. On the other hand, the TIC is more open and registers up to 73. When we compare different cat breeds, the differences do stand out. For example, if we look at their body structure, we have two extremes. Compact cats, with that rounded appearance like the pretty shore hair, compared to the Orientals, much more stylized and athletic like the Abyssinian. Another option is to classify them by their coat, from the long and dense hair of the Maine Coon to the short-haired ones like the Bombay, passing through curious textures such as the curly coat of the Kelcric Rex or, of course, the famous Sphinx. And then there are also the breeds that are easily defined by a strange characteristic. For example, the Scottish Fowl have ears facing forward and the American Cole backwards. The Manx are born without a tail, and the Munchin have those very short legs that make them unmistakable. But before continuing to talk about our little cats, it is clear that nowadays almost all our life goes through the internet, emails, bank accounts, social networks, and even so, many people still use the same password for everything. And of course, when one leaks, suddenly several of your accounts can fall at once. And this is where the sponsor of this video comes in, Proton Pass. ProtonPass is a password manager that allows you to generate strong passwords automatically, store them securely, and access them easily from any device. Everything is protected with end-to-end encryption, so not even Proton can see your data. In addition, it is open source, which means that its code can be publicly audited to verify that it really protects your privacy. It also has a very useful function called Hide My Email. Basically, you can create email aliases to register on web pages or services without having to use your real email. That greatly reduces spam and also prevents your main address from ending up circulating in leaked databases. Added to this are things like auto-filling passwords, saving cards or secure notes, synchronization between devices, and the possibility of sharing access securely if you need it. So that's it. If you are interested, we leave you a link in the description and in the first comment with which you can get a huge discount more easily and possible. And now, yes, we continue with our little cats. Let's compare two breeds that are at opposite poles, the Maine Coon versus the Siamese. At first glance, the differences are obvious, but if we think about it well, in reality they are not so different, right? And it is that the diversity among cat breeds seems very little compared to the astonishing differences that exist among purebred dogs. You just have to put this next to this to understand what we mean. While some organizations recognize more than 300 dog breeds with very different shapes and sizes, in cats, the basic structure has barely changed. And why does that happen? Why don't we have enormous cats of 70 kilos or small little cats shaped like a sausage? Well, the key to this lies in their history. Although cats and dogs have been living with us for millennia, their paths are very different. And it is true that dogs have accompanied us for many more centuries, but even if we do not take that extra time into account, the way we have treated them makes the difference. Most of the modern cat breeds that we know today have been shaped only in the last 75 years. On the other hand, although many dog breeds are also recent, their ancestors have been selected for centuries according to their usefulness. Humans realized very early that the dog could be a multifunctional tool, so we began to design them for very specific tasks, such as protecting the home, performing heavy work in the field, or simply keeping us company. But not only that, you cannot use the same dog to follow a hare in open field as to get a ferret out of its burrow. In short, each task required a different anatomy. And what happened with cats? Well, compared to them, they only had two roles, either to control pests or to be good company. And cats already performed these tasks perfectly with their natural shape and size. We did not need a 70-kilo cat to hunt a 20 gray mouse. Basically, until recently, their owners did not feel the need to drastically modify their bodies. And having reached that point, we have to ask ourselves, where does a new cat breed come from today? To understand it, imagine that the DNA of an animal is like an instruction book. From time to time, nature makes a small spelling mistake when copying it. We call this a mutation. So suddenly, in a litter of normal cats, for example, one is born with very short legs or without a tail. In the wild, this copying error could be a serious problem for survival, but this is where we come in. Someone sees that rare animal, finds it curious, cute, funny, and decides to breed it so that its offspring inherit that same trait. That is, we are selecting it artificially. And if it becomes fashionable, then it turns out that a defect that natural selection might have eliminated ends up becoming the standard of a new breed. Let's give a concrete example. In 1966 in Toronto, a normal domestic cat had a hairless kitten called Prune. Indeed, we are talking about the first recognized Sphinx cat. And what exactly was happening to it? Well, this here is the KRT71 gene. It contains the necessary information to produce a key protein in the structure of hair and in the formation of hair follicles. That is, those small structures of the skin from where each hair is born and grows. A mutation in this gene changed the instructions to produce this protein, and this makes the hair so weak that it breaks before coming out or directly does not manage to anchor itself. By the way, an aside, when we talk about Sphinx cats, it seems that they are like a chicken breast, when in reality they are not like that. They are more like a peach. That is, this mutation does not always eliminate the coat 100%, but makes it microscopic and very fine. But for a cat to go from being a common cat with an error to a recognized breed, humans have also been accumulating and selecting variations in other genes. For example, in the Razaks, specimens have also been bred that had thicker skin and fatter pads. And here comes the problem. When we select a mutation only for aesthetics, sometimes we unintentionally take mutations in other genes that are harmful to health. Those cats, for example, have a greater predisposition to suffer heart problems. And why does this happen? Well, let's return to the case of Prune. To try to fix that lack of hair, Prune could have been crossed with close relatives, such as its own mother, and from that mating different kittens would be born, some with hair and others without it. If the breed is established from so few specimens, and if the original cat also had a hidden error that affected the heart, its descendants could also inherit it. That is why, in recent years, The objective is that there are responsible breeders who control these extreme variations and investigate strategies based on genetic data to produce much healthier animals. Because, obviously, in the end, health should be above aesthetics, by the way. If you want to know why there are cats that have orange fur, the reason was recently discovered, and we made a video explaining it. We also leave it in the description. And well, we could not end the video without talking about hybrid cats. They arise from the crossing between a domestic cat and a wild feline of small or medium size. For example, the most popular hybrid in the world is the Bengal, which results from the crossing between a domestic cat and the Asian leopard cat. Another example is the Savannah, which comes from the crossing between a domestic cat and the serval, which is an African wild feline with large ears and long legs. Of course, not all feline associations accept hybrids equally. Recognition usually depends on how far the cat is from its wild ancestor, that is, how many generations of distance there are between them. And up to here, today's video, friends. What did you think of the topic? Do you have a little cat at home? Do you know if it is of some breed? We read you in the comments. And remember to leave a good like, which is very important for the video to reach more people.